never thought I'd become the kind of person who follows someone. The kind who hides in parking lots with binoculars, who checks phone records, who questions every smile and every late-night excuse. But life has a way of pushing you into roles you never auditioned for. My name is Margaret, and I'm 62 years old. I raised my daughter Emma to be strong, independent, and trusting. Maybe too trusting. For 3 years, I watched her marriage to Derek slowly drain the light from her eyes, and I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being an overprotective mother, that the unease I felt every time he walked into a room was just my own paranoia. I was wrong. This story begins on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, when the world was painted in those beautiful amber tones that make you believe everything will work out fine. I was at Emma's house, babysitting my 2 grandsons while she worked a double shift at the hospital. Emma's a pediatric nurse, the kind who stays late to read stories to scared children, who remembers every patient's name long after they've been discharged. Derek had left his jacket on the back of a chair, an expensive leather jacket that he'd bought himself for his birthday, telling Emma they could afford it even though I knew their savings account told a different story. I wasn't snooping. Not really. I was just tidying up, being helpful, being the kind of mother-in-law who doesn't leave a mess for her exhausted daughter to come home to. That's when something small and black fell out of the inner pocket and clattered onto the hardwood floor. At first, I thought it was a phone, but when I picked it up, I realized it was something else entirely. A small GPS tracker, about the size of a matchbox with a magnetic strip on one side. The kind you might use to keep track of a car, or a package, or someone you didn't trust. My heart started racing in a way it hadn't since my husband died 5 years ago. I stood there in Emma's living room, surrounded by toys and family photos, holding this tiny piece of technology that represented something dark and invasive. Why would Derek have a GPS tracker? Who was he tracking? The answer that came to me first was the one I didn't want to believe. Was he tracking Emma? Was my son-in-law so controlling, so possessive, that he needed to monitor his wife's every movement? I thought about all the times Emma had mentioned Derek calling her repeatedly during her shifts. The way he always seemed to know exactly when she left work, even though her schedule varied. The strange comments he'd make about places she'd been, conversations she'd had with colleagues, stops she'd made on the way home. I slipped the tracker into my purse. I know what you're thinking. I should have confronted him. I should have told Emma immediately. But I'd learned something about abuse over the years. Something that social workers and therapists have told me again and again. You can't force someone to see what they're not ready to see. If I went to Emma with just a tracker and suspicions, she'd defend him. She'd make excuses. She'd pull away from me. I needed proof. I needed to understand the full picture. That night, after Emma came home and I'd gone back to my own small apartment across town, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in front of me. I turned the tracker over and over in my hands. There was a small reset button on the side and a USB port for charging. This wasn't some cheap device bought on impulse. This was professional-grade equipment. I'd never been particularly good with technology. My grandson had to help me set up Netflix. But desperation makes you learn quickly. I spent 3 hours that night watching YouTube videos about GPS trackers, reading forums, understanding how they worked. What I learned made my blood run cold. These devices worked through apps. Someone, somewhere, was watching a little dot move across a map on their phone screen, following someone's every movement, recording their patterns, building a digital cage around them. But here's what didn't make sense. If Derek was tracking Emma, why would he leave the tracker in his jacket pocket? Why wouldn't it be hidden in her car, in her purse, somewhere she'd never find it? Unless he wasn't tracking Emma at all. The thought came to me at 2 in the morning, when I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling. What if Derek was the one being tracked? What if someone else was monitoring his movements? The next morning, I did something I'm not proud of. I called Derek and told him I'd accidentally taken his jacket home with me. Could I drop it off at his office? He seemed flustered, uncertain, but he agreed. He worked as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company. The kind of job that sounded impressive, but paid less than you'd think. When I arrived at his office building, a modern glass structure on the edge of the business district, Derek was waiting in the lobby. He looked tired. Actually, he looked worse than tired. He looked haunted. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hand trembled slightly when he took the jacket from me. "Thanks, Margaret," he said, already checking the inner pocket. I saw the relief wash over his face when he felt the tracker still there. "I really appreciate it. Is everything okay, Derek?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle, concerned, motherly. Yeah, everything's fine," he said, but his eyes were darting around the lobby like he expected someone to jump out at him. "Just busy at work. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was, but I was going to find out. I spent the next week being the kind of grandmother who shows up unexpectedly, who volunteers to babysit at odd hours, who happens to be in the neighborhood. Emma was grateful for the help, though I could see the strain in her face getting worse. She and Derek were fighting more. She'd mention it in passing, always downplaying it, always making excuses. During one of these visits, while Derek was in the shower and Emma was putting the boys to bed, I did something that crossed a line. I went through Derek's home office. I'm not going to pretend I felt good about it. I felt like a criminal, like I was betraying trust, like I was becoming exactly the kind of intrusive mother-in-law I'd always sworn I'd never be. But I found something hidden in the back of his desk drawer. Underneath old tax returns and warranty documents was a burner phone, a cheap prepaid cell phone, the kind you see in crime dramas. It was turned off, but when I pressed the power button, it came to life with a full battery. Someone was keeping this phone charged and ready. I didn't have time to go through it. I heard the shower turn off upstairs, but I took a photo of it with my own phone, capturing the model and the phone number printed on the back of the device. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely put everything back the way I'd found it. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about Emma's face, the way her smile had become something she wore instead of something she felt. I thought about my grandsons, growing up in a house filled with secrets and tension. I thought about Derek, and the tracker, and the burner phone, and I realized I was dealing with something much bigger than I'd imagined. I needed help. I have a friend named Patricia who works as a private investigator. We'd met years ago at a book club, bonded over our love of mystery novels, and stayed friends even after the book club dissolved. Patricia had always told me that if I ever needed anything, I should call her. At the time, I'd laughed it off. What would a retired school teacher need with a private investigator? Now I knew Patricia met me at a coffee shop on a rainy Thursday morning. She listened to everything, taking notes in a small leather notebook, never interrupting, never judging. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and looked at me with those sharp, assessing eyes. "Margaret," she said slowly, "I think your son-in-law is involved in something illegal." The words hung between us like a physical thing. The tracker, the burner phone, the paranoia. It all points to someone who's either being investigated or who's involved in something they shouldn't be, Patricia continued. The question is what? And who else is involved? Can you find out? I asked. Patricia smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. I can try, but Margaret, you need to understand something. Once we start pulling this thread, we might not like what we find. This could destroy Emma's marriage. It could put her in danger. It could change everything. Her marriage is already being destroyed, I said. And if Derek's involved in something that could hurt my daughter or my grandsons, I need to know. Patricia nodded. Okay, but we do this carefully. Professionally, no more going through his things alone. No more taking risks. You bring me information, and I'll investigate it properly. I agreed. I felt relief wash over me. I wasn't alone anymore. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia worked her magic. She had contacts I didn't even know existed. People who could run background checks, who could trace phone records, who could find out things that ordinary people couldn't access. I continued my role as the helpful grandmother, the supportive mother, gathering small pieces of information and passing them to Patricia. What she found was worse than I'd imagined. Derek was having an affair, but not the kind you're thinking. He was having an affair with a woman named Melissa Chen. She was also married, also had children, and her husband was the one who'd planted the GPS tracker. Patricia discovered this by tracking the device's serial number back to an online purchase made by a man named Robert Chen. Robert was a software engineer, methodical and thorough, and he'd been tracking Derek's movements for 3 months. But the affair was just the beginning. Melissa Chen worked at the same pharmaceutical company as Derek in the accounting department, and together, they'd been embezzling money. Small amounts at first, then larger and larger sums. They were siphoning funds from the company's research and development budget, creating fake invoices, inflating expense reports. Over the past 18 months, they'd stolen nearly $200,000. Patricia showed me the evidence. Bank statements, transaction records, emails she'd managed to access through methods I didn't ask about and didn't want to know. It was all there, laid out in front of me like a map of betrayal. Robert Chen found out about the affair 6 months ago, Patricia explained. He hired his own investigator, discovered the financial fraud, and he's been gathering evidence ever since. The tracker is just one part of it. He's building a case. Why hasn't he gone to the police? I asked. Because he's smart, Patricia said. He wants to make sure his wife goes down too. He wants enough evidence that there's no possibility of her claiming Derek forced her into it, or that she was just a victim. Robert Chen is playing the long game. I felt sick. Emma was married to a criminal, a thief and a cheater who was dragging her into a scandal that would destroy her career, her reputation, everything she'd worked for. There's something else, Patricia said, her voice gentle now. Emma's name is on some of the accounts. Derek used her information to open several business accounts that were part of the embezzlement scheme. If this goes public, if the company presses charges, Emma could be implicated. The room spun around me. My daughter, my beautiful, kind, honest daughter, could end up facing criminal charges because of the man she'd trusted, the man she'd married, the father of her children. What do I do? I whispered. Patricia reached across the table and took my hand. We build our own case. We document everything. We prepare Emma for what's coming. And we make sure that when this all falls apart, and it will fall apart, she's protected. That's when my revenge began. Not revenge in the traditional sense. I wasn't going to hurt Derek physically. I wasn't going to humiliate him publicly or destroy his property. No, my revenge was going to be much more thorough than that. I was going to dismantle his life piece by piece, ensure my daughter was protected, and make sure he paid for every single thing he'd done. First, I needed to tell Emma, but I needed to do it right. I invited her to lunch, just the two of us, at a quiet restaurant where we could talk without interruption. She arrived looking exhausted, her nurse's scrubs showing beneath her jacket because she'd come straight from a morning shift. When she hugged me, I could feel how thin she'd gotten. "Mom, is everything okay?" She asked as we sat down. You sounded serious on the phone. Emma, sweetheart, I need you to listen to me. I began. I need you to hear everything I'm about to tell you before you react. Can you do that? I saw fear flash across her face. Is it the boys? Are they okay? The boys are fine. This is about Derek. I told her everything. I showed her the evidence Patricia had gathered, the photos, the documents, the timeline of the affair, and the embezzlement. I watched my daughter's face cycle through disbelief, anger, shock, and finally, a kind of numb acceptance. When I finished, she didn't cry. She just sat there, staring at the papers spread across the table between our untouched meals. I knew something was wrong, she finally said, her voice hollow. I knew it. But I thought maybe he was just stressed about work. I thought maybe I was being paranoid. She stopped, and now the tears came. Not dramatic sobs, but silent streams down her cheeks that she didn't bother to wipe away. Your name is on some of the accounts, I said gently. He used your information. If this becomes public, you could be implicated. That got through to her. Her head snapped up, and I saw fear replace the grief in her eyes. The boys. If I lose my nursing license, if I get arrested, what happens to my boys? That's not going to happen, I said firmly. We're going to make sure of it. But Emma, you need to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. You need to follow my instructions exactly. Over the next hour, I laid out the plan that Patricia and I had developed. Emma would hire a divorce attorney immediately, someone who specialized in fraud cases. She would document everything in her home, every account, every asset, every piece of evidence that showed she had no knowledge of Derek's activities. She would start creating a paper trail that proved she was a victim, not a co-conspirator. More importantly, we were going to beat Robert Chen at his own game. Patricia had contacts at the pharmaceutical company where Derek worked. Through careful, discreet inquiries, she learned that the company's internal audit department had already noticed some irregularities. They hadn't yet identified Derek and Melissa as the culprits, but they were getting close. What we needed to do was speed up the process while simultaneously protecting Emma. Emma filed for divorce 2 days later, citing irreconcilable differences. Derek was shocked. He tried to talk to her, to convince her they could work things out, but she was stone-faced in a way I'd never seen before. My gentle daughter had found a core of steel I didn't know she possessed. I know about Melissa. She told him calmly. I know everything. Don't insult me by lying. Derek went pale. He stammered, tried to explain, tried to make excuses. Emma just handed him the divorce papers and told him to move out. But she didn't mention the embezzlement. That was crucial. We needed Derek to think Emma only knew about the affair. We needed him to feel safe enough to continue his normal patterns while we worked behind the scenes. Patricia, meanwhile, compiled a comprehensive dossier of evidence about the embezzlement. Every transaction, every fake invoice, every suspicious transfer. She organized it professionally, added explanatory notes, and prepared it for delivery. But we didn't send it to the police. Not yet. Instead, Patricia sent an anonymous tip to the pharmaceutical company's fraud hotline. Just enough information to point them in the right direction, but not so much that it would be obvious the information came from someone with insider access. The company's investigation moved quickly after that. Within a week, auditors had identified the fraudulent accounts. Within 2 weeks, they traced the money to Derek and Melissa. On a cold Monday morning in late October, Derek was escorted out of his office by security. So was Melissa Chen. The company pressed criminal charges that same day. I heard about it from Emma, who got a call from one of Derek's co-workers. She sat in my kitchen, holding a cup of tea I'd made her. and told me what had happened with an odd calmness. They arrested him, Mom, she said. They actually arrested him. How do you feel? I asked. She thought about it for a long moment. Relieved, she finally said. Is that terrible? I feel relieved. It's not terrible, I assured her. It's human. But my revenge wasn't complete yet. Remember Robert Chen? The husband who'd been tracking Derek for months? He'd built his own case against his wife and Derek, and he was ready to use it in his divorce proceedings. But there was a problem. Some of the evidence he'd gathered was obtained illegally. The GPS tracker, for instance, was placed on a car he didn't own. Some of the emails he'd accessed were from accounts he'd hacked. Patricia, through her network, made sure that information reached Robert's wife's attorney. Not directly, of course. These things had to be handled delicately. But soon enough, Melissa, Chen's lawyer, was filing motions to have certain evidence excluded from the divorce proceedings, on the grounds that it had been obtained illegally. Robert Chen's perfect case started falling apart. Meanwhile, Emma's divorce was proceeding smoothly. Her attorney was excellent, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd handled dozens of fraud cases. Because Emma had filed for divorce before Derek's arrest, and because we'd carefully documented her lack of knowledge about the financial crimes, she was able to distance herself from Derek's legal troubles. The company's investigation confirmed what Patricia had found. Emma's information had been used without her knowledge. She was a victim of identity theft, not a co-conspirator. Her nursing license was safe. Her reputation was intact. Derek, on the other hand, was facing federal charges. Wire fraud, embezzlement, identity theft. His attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the company wanted to make an example of him. They wanted to show their shareholders that they took fraud seriously. I watched the preliminary hearings from the public gallery. Derek looked like a shell of the man who'd married my daughter. He'd lost weight. His expensive suits hung off him, and there was a defeated slump to his shoulders. I didn't feel sorry for him, not even a little bit. Melissa Chen took a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Derek in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her marriage fell apart, but Robert Chen's case was so damaged by the illegally obtained evidence that she ended up with joint custody of their children and a decent settlement. Derek went to trial in February. It lasted 3 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Emma and I sat in her living room the night after the sentencing, watching the boys play with building blocks on the floor. She'd been quiet all day, processing everything. Do you think I should feel worse? She asked me suddenly. He's going to prison for 8 years. The boys are going to grow up with their father in jail. Shouldn't I feel sadder? I chose my words carefully. You're allowed to feel however you feel, sweetheart. Derek made his choices. He chose to steal money. He chose to have an affair. He chose to use your name and your information to commit crimes. You didn't do any of those things. His consequences are not your responsibility. I loved him once, she said softly. I really did. I know. But I think I stopped loving him a long time ago. I just didn't want to admit it. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat like that for a while, watching her sons play, watching the evening light fade through the windows. The revenge I'd wanted, the justice I'd sought, it hadn't come from any dramatic confrontation. It had come from careful documentation, strategic planning, and patience. It had come from protecting my daughter and making sure the truth came to light. Derek lost everything. His job, his freedom, his family, his future. But more than that, he lost the narrative. He couldn't claim he was a victim. He couldn't blame anyone else. The evidence was too clear, too thorough. to damning Dot and Emma. She rebuilt her life. She got the house in the divorce settlement, along with most of their savings that hadn't been seized as proceeds of crime. She continued her work at the hospital, where she was eventually promoted to charge nurse. She started dating again, cautiously, choosing better this time. My grandsons adjusted better than I expected. Children are resilient in ways that break your heart. They see their father once a month in prison visits, and Emma handles it with grace, never speaking badly about Derek in front of them, but also never making excuses for him. As for me, I learned something about myself through all of this. I learned that I was capable of things I never thought possible. I learned that revenge doesn't have to be violent or cruel to be effective. The most powerful revenge is simply ensuring that people face the appropriate consequences for their actions. 6 months after Derek's sentencing, I received a letter from him. It had been forwarded through Emma's attorney as part of the restraining order that prevented him from contacting Emma directly. She asked me if I wanted to read it. I did. The letter was long, rambling, full of self-pity and excuses. But there was one paragraph that caught my attention. I know Emma's mother never liked me. I always felt her watching me, judging me. I thought she was just being an overprotective mom. I never realized she was the one who figured everything out. Tell Margaret, she won. Tell her I hope she's happy. Emma looked at me after I finished reading. Are you happy, Mom? I thought about it. Was I happy? Happy that my daughter's marriage had ended? Happy that my grandsons would grow up without their father? Happy that a man was in prison? No, none of those things made me happy. But I was satisfied. Satisfied that justice had been served. Satisfied that my daughter was safe. Satisfied that the truth had come to light. I'm content, I told her. I'm content knowing I did what needed to be done to protect you and the boys. The tracker that started everything is in a box in my closet now, along with all the other evidence Patricia and I gathered. I keep it as a reminder that sometimes the smallest things lead to the biggest revelations. A reminder that mother's intuition is real, even when you doubt yourself. A reminder that you should never underestimate a grandmother who's protecting her family. Emma asked me recently if I regretted anything about how it all went down. If I wished I'd handled things differently. I told her the truth. The only thing I regretted was not acting sooner, not trusting my instincts earlier, not seeing the signs that were probably there all along. But life doesn't give you do-overs. It only gives you the next decision, the next choice, the next opportunity to do the right thing. I found a tracker. It led me to my son-in-law's secret, and that secret, once exposed, unraveled an entire web of lies that had been slowly strangling my daughter's life. Some people might say what I did was wrong, that I invaded privacy, that I manipulated situations, that I should have stayed out of my daughter's marriage. But those people don't understand what it's like to watch someone you love being slowly destroyed by someone else's lies. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. The last time I saw, Derek was at a supervised visitation with the boys about a year after his sentencing. I'd driven them to the facility where the visits happened, a sad institutional building that smelled like disinfectant and broken families. He looked older, harder, diminished by prison life. He saw me in the waiting room, and our eyes met. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at him, letting him see that I wasn't sorry, that I'd do it all again. He looked away first. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if I hadn't found that tracker. If I'd put Derek's jacket back without noticing it fall from the pocket. If I'd been less curious, less suspicious, less determined to protect my daughter, Emma would probably still be married to him. She might even be facing criminal charges herself. My grandsons would be growing up in a house filled with lies and stolen money. The truth would have come out eventually, but by then, the damage might have been irreparable. Instead, Emma is thriving. She's stronger now, more confident, more aware of her own worth. She's dating a paramedic she met at the hospital, a kind man who makes her laugh and who treats her boys like they're precious. She's happy, really, genuinely happy in a way she never was with Derek. And that, more than anything else, more than Derek's prison sentence or the money that was recovered or the justice that was served, that is the real victory. I protected my daughter. I saved my grandsons from growing up in a toxic environment. I made sure the truth came to light before it was too late. If that makes me the villain in Derek's story, I can live with that. Because in my daughter's story, in my grandson's story, I'm the hero. And that's all that matters. So if you're reading this, if you're listening to this story, and you're wondering if you should trust your instincts about someone in your life, about a situation that doesn't feel right, about secrets that are being kept, I want you to remember something. That uncomfortable feeling you have, that nagging suspicion, that voice in the back of your head saying something is wrong, listen to it. Don't ignore it. Don't talk yourself out of it. Don't let anyone make you feel crazy or paranoid for paying attention. Because sometimes, a tiny tracker in a jacket pocket is the thread that, when pulled, unravels everything. And sometimes, you're the only person who can pull that thread. Trust yourself. Protect the people you love. And never apologize for doing what needs to be done. That's my story. That's my revenge. That's my truth. And I'd live it all over again without changing a single thing.